It's weird to me that Dark Souls is only a decade old. Here's a game that completely shook the cultural zeitgeist surrounding action RPGs, completely changing how we discuss, design, and digest them. The fact that it remains so high on the list of most influential video games alongside games like The Legend of Zelda and Final Fantasy, while still being relatively recent, is proof that FromSoftware came up with a concept that was so utterly groundbreaking at the time. I'm Sarah from GameByte, and this is Elden Ring. If you would like to see more video reviews, please make sure to like and subscribe because it really does help us out a lot. Thanks! It's been a rocky few years since it was first revealed at E3 2019, but FromSoftware is finally ready to launch Elden Ring, a game also utilising the Souls-like formula as each of the studio's games did beforehand. This action RPG subgenre is infamous for its deep character leveling, its sprawling worlds, and perhaps most controversially, its difficulty levels. If Dark Souls 3 was the resplendent end to a series legacy so powerful it completely dismantled how we designed action RPGs, then how on earth do you make a follow-up to that? While all the pre-release marketing for the game definitely feels like it's more of a Dark Souls 4 than its own thing, we've spent around 40 hours playing through Elden Ring from start to finish, and that idea could not be further from the truth. When you yourself boot it up, you'll no doubt realise that the same formula exists within its DNA. But Elden Ring is a radical departure from the Souls series. Each of its new features feels somewhat borrowed from those that came before, but fleshed out more to become their own thing. The biggest improvements come in the department of three areas: exploration, narrative, and combat. So first of all, let's talk about the exploration. Elden Ring has a massive open world, not on the scale of anything we've seen before from the developer. Now, I'm usually an advocate for smaller worlds with dense content, but this time, the sheer size of the lands between feels earned. This is easily the biggest FromSoftware game ever created, not just in terms of how much ground the setting covers, but also with how much content there is to experience. Longtime Souls fans are going to go berserk for this. Yes, you have a map. You'll need to fill it in by picking up fragments at specific stone obelisks, which will help you chart your journey and familiarise yourself with certain landmarks. Now, I'll be honest, I was pretty initially skeptical about this, and you might be too. I actually refused to use it for the first couple of hours of my playthrough, because I liked how the original Dark Souls didn't have a system like this. Half the fun was making up the map in your head and manually piecing the world together as you went along. But considering the size of the lands between, it's pretty much impossible to ignore the map here. It's your friend, and it'll help you get around frustration-free. And don't worry, there are still plenty of unmarked locations you can only see by exploring, and all the best discoveries will be found if you let your curiosity in. So in conclusion, don't be a muppet like me, because the map doesn't take away anything from the fun of discovery. Oh my god, I'd die for Tauren. Tauren Elden Ring. Tauren Elden Ring. You're also given a horse to gallop around on called Tauren, and not only does this allow you to cover more ground in less time, but Tauren has magical abilities like his, double jump. Mario is quaking in his boots right now. You'll also be able to perform certain combat moves from the top of him, which opens you up to more options when approaching battles. The design theory surrounding horseback in gaming is actually really interesting because it seems like a lot of developers really struggle with it. Now, Red Dead Redemption 2 and Assassin's Creed Odyssey did it perfectly just a few years ago, but I always hated the horse controls in Breath of the Wild. I'm sorry, please don't hate me. Hey, listen, Breath of the Wild is one of my favourite games of all time. I'm allowed to criticize the horse riding combat here. It sucked. And you might be thinking, well, hang on, Dark Souls here didn't have horseback controls, did it? No, it didn't. But thankfully, despite no previous games featuring player-controlled horse riding, Tauren feels fluid, responsive, and not at all annoying. I love it. Not only that, but despite there being no dialogue between Tauren and your player character, there's still a little bromance bond going on there. The more you play the game, the closer your relationship to Tauren feels. He's a trusty steed. Epona, eat your heart out. He'll have your back more times than you can count, so shout out to Elden Ring for making me care so much about a fake horse. And this is coming from someone who would reset their Breath of the Wild saves if their horse fell off a cliff. Also, please tell me that someone appreciated the BoJack Horseman reference I worked in there. This is my job. Oh my god. Elden Ring's story is very minimal in its presentation. You might like that, you might not. Whilst there is a deep plot, most of it is told through environmental details like item descriptions and some cryptic dialogue. In fact, even after rolling the credits, there's so many aspects of the game that I still need to think about and revisit in a second playthrough. Elden Ring, much like its predecessors, packs a lot into a little. What I love about this is that it allows you to piece together the story yourself using your own clues that you've picked up. Your own interpretation of what's going on might be different from another player's, and even a decade later, the Dark Souls community still isn't struggling to come up with new theories and discussions. I think it's safe to say that the same will happen with Elden Ring. But here's a quick roundup for you. Number 1, it takes place in the realm of the lands between. Number 2, the Elden Ring has been destroyed and its remaining shards have been scattered throughout the kingdom. These shards are now possessed by demigods corrupt by power. Number 3, you become the Elden Lord by defeating each of these demigods and restoring the Elden Ring. Winner. A big selling point for the game is that it's a collaboration between Miyazaki, who you might know as the writer, director and designer of practically every Soulsborne game previous, and fantasy author George R.R. Martin, the writer of A Song in Ice and Fire books. Miyazaki has even said that his work served as an inspiration for some of his own games, so this creative partnership is particularly fulfilling. It really does feel like the background of the entire FromSoftware library finally coming full circle. Alright, yeah, you're laughing, it's a meme, real Breath of the Wild vibes, I get it, but for real, we're getting real Breath of the Wild vibes from this game. One thing that is way better though is the combat. It incorporates bits and elements from each past Soulsborne game, so you can choose to play close range and aggressive like in Bloodborne, careful and methodical like in Dark Souls, or stealthily and structured like in Sekiro. You'll feel right at home choosing a fighting style that works for you, and you might think that an amalgamation of choosing all these different styles would result in a weird Frankensteinian mess of a game, but enough care has been taken to ensure that each form of playing is respected and fleshed out in great detail. Likewise, the enemy and boss variety is also something that Elden Ring does really well. Anyone familiar with FromSoftware knows that the developer is pretty keen on reusing these assets in new and interesting ways in the late game cycle. And this is absolutely true here too, as early game bosses reappear later with new abilities and extra difficulty. But on the other hand, the amount of diversity in enemies is also unlike anything seen in the series before. Like, I can't count the number of unique bosses the game has in total, but it easily trumps any of the previous Soulsborne numbers. A lot of people were a little bit concerned that the entire world would look like the first area, Limgrave. Luckily, that's definitely not the case here. Now, I don't want to spoil too much for you, so I'll just say that each environment is so uniquely designed, it genuinely brought a tear to my eye a couple of times. Although, let's be honest, nothing will be as beautiful as Bluepoint's Demon's Souls remake. Now, we do have to talk a little bit about PC performance. On screen now, you'll see the recommended specs to play Elden Ring on PC, and my PC beats this. I did see a lot of frame rate drops whilst in the open world and exploring a cave, and the worst thing is, it can happen during a critical moment in a boss fight. There were so many moments where I died after experiencing a massive lag, and tweaking the graphic settings didn't really do much. Be warned that this may frustrate your early experiences with Elden Ring. Oh, I can smell the difficulty mode discourse a mile off. I'm gonna delete Twitter. Now onto the question on everyone's lips. Is Elden Ring more accessible than the series past? Yes and no. One of the reasons a lot of players may have dropped Sekiro early on was due to its brutal difficulty. Since the levels were fairly linear and most of the bosses had you brute force your way through, increasing your health and damage was also intrinsically linked to beating these bosses. You couldn't just go away and grind for a few hours to come back stronger, and if you couldn't get past a certain section, you had to adapt and learn to power through it, or not make any progress. Improvise, adapt, overcome. That's a fine design for some, and not so fine for others. Elden Ring's massive open world means you already have a dozen different directions to explore in as soon as you begin the game. That means if you head one way and run into a boss you can't beat, you can just leave. Try a different route. Limgrave itself is large and fairly easy, so that new players will settle in pretty nicely. You'll get stronger and level up some more, which lets you come back better equipped to defeat the boss. It's a game that doesn't give you many opportunities to feel like you're making no progress at all. But that doesn't mean it's a cakewalk either. And don't be fooled into thinking that Elden Ring being a little more accessible means that it's easy. The difficulty curve ramps up dramatically later on, and bosses and big enemies will give you a lot of trouble. Those heart-pounding, sweaty moments of getting the big dragon down to a sliver of health is a feeling very few games these days seem to do well. Elden Ring manages it. It is fantastic to see that FromSoftware is still capable of making a challenging game that stays challenging all the way to the end. So, is Elden Ring actually worth your time? If Dark Souls was the earthquake, Elden Ring is the aftershock. In a sense, it's more of a love letter to Soulsborne, incorporating dramatic fragments of each past game into a single product that is rewarding and fulfilling. It's not perfect, but I believe that FromSoftware has followed through on the hype. I genuinely think that they have been able to create something truly mesmerizing. For a score out of 10 and for more information, check out our written review in the comments. I've been Sarah from GameByte, and you've been wonderful. Thanks for watching.